Everyone, glad you made it. Welcome live stream, mainly South Carolina. We've got some nuggets for you tonight. Jeff is going to drive me crazy. Can you shut that door, please? I don't know what it is. It's something, but I don't know what it is. I spilled all my grape juice last week. It's sticky now up here. All the wine, all the blood. Okay, it's week 5. Week 5. Are you guys ready to repent in dust and ashes? What? So good. We have some good stuff tonight. I'm really glad you're here. Really, everyone. Dig in. As I always say, if you hear something that's good, that's epiphanal, then write it down. Don't assume you're going to remember it. If it hits you like that's meaningful, there's probably something there. Write it down and think through it. Process it. Talk through it with someone. Don't wait 20 years. Don't suffer another moment. Act now. Okay, so we are in week 5, but we're going to finish up chapter 3 of the book. And this is like the first time I feel like I'm not going to get through a book because like so much of it is so good. It's really hard for me to edit. So we're going to get into chapter 4 tonight also. So in case you missed it last week, I just want to give you a few nuggets from last week by way of review so you remember. And I hope you're doing your homework. I gave out lots of questions. I hope everybody who's given me feedback on when they took the time to have discussions have been saying some great things. So I hope you're not missing that opportunity. That's what date night is. We want to get to know each other. So, by way of reminder, I'm saying all of us in our marriages have to transition from romance, infatuation, to actual love. And some of us, I will say, and I'm saying this provocatively, intentionally, we don't deserve it. We don't deserve love because we're not willing to put the effort in to make that happen. So it is a challenge for all of us. It is this extreme challenge that every marriage has to go through, but it is so well worth it. Well worth it. And it is a struggle. So if you're in that struggle, I just want to commend you and express gratitude to you that it's worth the struggle, and I'm grateful that you're willing to go through that process. You don't have to do it alone. We're here to wrestle with you. Okay, so the answer to conflict, quick review, the answer to conflict, just keep it simple, is, can you guess? Communication. Conflict is an opportunity to communicate with each other, to get to know each other better. That's what, and so, but we have to learn to communicate in healthy ways. So there's a condition. And so some of us, however conflict was handled as when we grew up, that became the norm for us. So conflict is either sweep it under the rug or have a meltdown, losing temper, it gets heated. It doesn't have to be that way. We can communicate the hardest of truths to each other if we do it in love, in gentleness, in kindness, in patience, assuming the other person has a good reason for what they're doing. We can talk through it to understand each other better. So it's, I hate you, versus I feel so distant from you. So the idea is when I'm just using this, trying to be as extreme as I can to make a point. If I'm thinking and even say I hate you, what I'm actually feeling is I feel distant from you. And as Gottman, going back to Gottman again, is the idea it's a bid for connection. So can't we help each other out? Can't we love each other by actually trying to realize that, have enough self-awareness to realize that about ourselves and say it in kinder and gentler ways? How many of you like being yelled at? How many of you enjoy that? How many of you like being shamed? How many of you like to have your face rubbed in your mistakes? No. So it's I hate you versus I feel distant from you. So we're gonna kind of flesh that out even a little bit this morning. A couple more review points from last week. Last week we looked at our own character issues. Not that any of you here have any besides me. But tonight we're going to look at how we handle our spouse's character issues. Not that they have any. So last week we looked at denial. if you're in denial about your struggle with insecurity by attempting to be strong, your spouse cannot love and have compassion for your insecure parts. The idea of, I'm communicating this insecurity through this expression of vulnerability, and I have an opportunity for my actual self to experience love. Versus, I put up the armor, I put up this front, like, I've got it all together. And so when we do that, I've got it all together, then our spouse doesn't have an opportunity to actually love us as we truly are. This impoverishes the marriage bond and prevents a deeper connection with your spouse. Now, can you imagine what the opposite of denial is from last week? The opposite of denial is this is why we're reviewing. Well done. Confession. Confession. So if someone's coming to confess to us, can we make it easy on them? It's not a gotcha, I told you so moment. And what we saw in the book was when we do come out of denial and actually confess our insecurities and whatever other thing to our spouse, a lot of times we're surprised by the warm response that we receive. So, the opposite of denial is confession. The other thing we saw as far as our own character flaws, we have denial. Next one of them was withdrawal from relationship. Withdrawal from relationship. Now, why do we do this? Why do we withdraw from the relationship? So again, we're back on the spectrum of meltdown. Meltdown can be, and the opposite is dismissal, right? So meltdown, both of them are somewhat manipulative. Don't you agree? Withdrawing from the relationship can be manipulative. So meltdown is, you got to handle it. I'm going to erupt all over this room until you handle it. Dismissive means I'm going to run, I'm going to stonewall. So, but withdrawal from a relationship is really a means of punishing your spouse for hurting you. Now, why would we do this? Why do we withdraw? There's three things we saw last week. I'll say them quickly. Withdraw from relationship. We could fear. What do we fear? Three things. Rejection, being controlled, or being judged. Or how about a nice tidy package that includes all three simultaneously? Wouldn't that be nice? A nice rejection sandwich, as it were. Fear, you could fear rejection, being controlled, being judged. And so I'm going to withhold affection from you. I'm going to withhold my presence from you as recompense for hurting me. Okay, then, so after withdrawal from a relationship, we talked about self-centeredness. Self-centeredness is the idea of you're living like you're single, but except you're in a marriage. That's a problem. Judgmentalism. This is the last one we'll review. Judgmentalism derives from our need to be loved and accepted, but whereby we hate both the sin and the sinner. So we see things as like, okay, so you're not what I need you to be, so therefore I have to judge and condemn you. You're taking it personally. And judgmentalism is also the idea that I'm projecting upon you your motives. Okay, so this week is about how we relate to our spouse's character issues and are trying to control them. Ha ha ha. Has anybody been successful at controlling their spouse? So you admit this after all these years. Rebecca, just for the live stream, I don't want to miss this. For the record, she's saying that rarely she's been able to control her spouse. That would be me. Oh. All right. So we're talking about now how we try to control our spouse. So our spouse exhibits a character flaw, character issue. We respond by seeking to control them. That'll do it. That'll do the trick. So boundaries on our attempt to control. What we're learning throughout this course is we cannot control our spouse. What we can do, though, is work on our own self-control. So there's a sense in which part of what's being said there is we're not going to have the ground to really help, especially men. It's called to be spiritual servant leaders. How are we going to reach out and serve our spouse when we're in sin ourselves? How does that work? As spiritual leaders of the home, our holiness, our integrity matters. It matters. Everybody is going to bear up under the weight of our lack of integrity or our lack of holiness, including our wife, our children. Okay, so boundaries on our attempts to control. And I'll give you some examples of how we do this. Other control is the antithesis of having boundaries in marriage. Boundaries relinquish other control for self-control. So I'm going to give up on this idea. That's when I say tonight we're ready to repent, this is what we would have to repent of according to this book. I got to give up on the idea that I'm going to control my spouse. It's a fool's errand. It's just not going to happen. Unless, you're going to hold your spouse at gunpoint, but then you don't really have a wife, you have a victim of someone being kidnapped, which is not fun. So I'm going to give up on the idea of other control. I'm going to trade it in for self-control. And we're gonna get through some beautiful points about this tonight. I'm so excited. Some really good language tonight. Boundaries preserve the freedom of one spouse without at the same time enabling the irresponsibility of that spouse. So boundaries, I'll say it again, they preserve the freedom of one spouse without enabling them. Whatever I might be enabling them with. So, not respecting the others, how would I try to control? I'm not respecting the other person's no. The husband will make several attempts to change the decision of his spouse and disregard her feelings. Another way we try to control, punishing a wrong choice. When the husband chooses to do something the wife doesn't like, the wife will act put out or like a victim, poor me, and she will accuse her husband of not being loving or caring. That sounds like manipulation to me. It's just the way I would take that. No, without a context. Not valuing freedom. The husband will be more interested in his wife's making the right decision than in her free, heartfelt choice. When I read that, I think, rookie husband. Rookie mistakes, okay? So, not valuing freedom. The husband will be more interested in his wife's making the right decision than in her free, heartfelt choice. I mean, unless you want to be married to a robot, but I hope that robot doesn't have AI because that won't work either. Bad results. The wife who is being controlled will be resentful, act out, or retaliate. The wife who is being controlled will be resentful, act out, or retaliate. So that's what happens with control. God is the only one who could justifiably control our decisions, right? Does he do it? And yet he refrains from doing so. He gives us freedom to choose, and he weeps when our choices lead to ruin. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you are not willing. Matthew 23. God places such a high premium on our freedom that he shies away from forcing us to do things that would benefit us. He understands that we will never learn to love or respond to him without that costly freedom. So that same freedom that God gives us needs to be exhibited in our marriage. In this section, we will shed light on the ways we attempt to control our partners, and we will also provide ways to set boundaries on this unfortunate tendency. Okay, so here's 4 options for controlling. And I'm not arguing for these. What I would say is figure out which ones are the weapons that are in your arsenal. Which ones do you need to repent of? Do I need to repent of? Control comes in 4 different flavors: guilt, anger, persistent assaults on the spouse's boundary, and withholding love. So guilt. Guilt messages are intended to make our spouse feel responsible for our welfare. In other words, guilt controls by creating the impression that our spouse's freedom injures us. We talked about pain versus injury in the past. By choosing differently from us, our spouse has thus been unloving. So we guilt them. Secondly, anger. Anger is our basic protest against the fact that we are not God and that we cannot control reality. Anger can be direct or it can be covert, as in passive-aggressive behaviors or sarcastic remarks. It can involve threats or retaliation. It can also, in extreme situations, become dangerous, as in abusive marriages. Persistent assaults on the spouse's boundary, like a child who's been learned to keep asking until he hears the answer he wants. The spouse refuses to live with the boundary of the other. And then finally, withholding love. Of all the ways we attempt to control, withholding love may be the most powerful. Okay, so we're just setting the table here. Submitting to boundaries on our control. What are they? We repent we repent of our attempts to control in favor of granting freedom and love. Here are some of the ways you can set limits on your controlling attempts. Realize the cost of other control. The cost of other control is that you might get external compliance, but lose your spouse's heart. It's good. So good. Guilt, anger, assaults, and withholding all negate freedom and love. The spouse will go along, but will often be resentful or emotionally absent. Set limits on your desire for other control as you place a higher value on love. So it's not worth it. They're going to be resentful or emotionally absent anyway. Ask your spouse to let you know how your control affects them. Since marriage is at its core a bond of empathy, and we're going to talk about that later, and it's going to be so good. The bond of empathy, your mate's feelings are important to you. Often, when the controlled spouse lets the controlling spouse know how hurtful and distant the attempts make him, the controlling spouse feels compassion for the pain and is able to better set limits on the control. Just ask yourself the question right now, is your spouse's feelings, are they important to you? That's kind of like we're building up to this big idea tonight, and that's part of it. And I think it's, again, so good. So please track here. Ask your spouse to let you know how your control affects them. Since marriage is at the core, I said that, experience your own helplessness to change your spouse. Did you guys catch that? That's crazy talk. Experience your own helplessness to change your spouse. This is the idea of grieving. No matter how much you would like to believe the opposite, your spouse will not change their decisions, opinions, or feelings until they're ready to. You may need to realize that you live with someone whom you can't make do the right thing. This helplessness is often a very painful emotion. Angry control moves may give us the illusion that we have power over our spouse that we don't have. Accepting helplessness hurts, but it's where reality lies. So it's transitioning from being forceful in a conversation, dominating, to conversation, discussion, working through something. And in order to work through something, you really have to understand where the other person's coming from and vice versa. So that requires listening. It's so simple, but it's really powerful. So learn to grieve. What are you grieving? The idea that I can control my spouse. Grief helps us to accept the truth and let go of things we can't change or have. So what's better? Letting go of the idea that, hey, I can't change my spouse, or being self-deluded thinking you can control your spouse over the course of a lifetime and being thwarted again and again and again and again? I think the latter sounds more frustrating. When you allow your spouse freedom, you will often feel loss and sadness about losing what you desired from them. Allowing yourself to feel this grief frees you to accept reality and find new ways to adapt to your marriage. Again, this is one of those places where I love how this curriculum so corresponds to other things that we've gone through. Most recently, the attachment filter stuff. And of course, Gottman and all the shame stuff. So the idea that you have to move through those emotions, because what you don't process, you carry with you. You can carry unprocessed emotions with you for a lifetime. And the best way, as we keep saying, to process them so you can let go of them is to work through them with another human, an empathetic witness. We're going to, again, talk more about that. So work through your dependency issues. Is that what we've been talking about? If your spouse is the only person through whom you can get needs met, you will have a bent toward controlling them. Let me say it again. If your spouse is the only person through whom you can get your needs met, you will have a bent toward controlling them. Find sources of love, approval, truth, or forgiveness that include your spouse but are not limited to them. For example, you may have a need for recognition of the good things you accomplish. Don't expect your spouse to provide all of the kudos. This is a dated curriculum. Use your friends to meet this need as well. When you have other places to get your needs met, you are able better to give your spouse freedom. So, of course, what we say around here at Gospel Life is we have that relationship with God where we get our needs met. This is our prayer life. I don't see the verse here. Let me just read it to you. Because I don't want to miss an opportunity to say this once again. James 1:4 says, I'll start with verse 3. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. Verse 4, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, that is to say, when your endurance is mature. Maturity leads to, I don't need anything. The only thing, what we say around here is the only thing we really need is a relationship with God. Once we have that, I don't have to be desperate or needy anymore. Which is a very, like, getting set free out of a prison cell. That is like a crucial step for a lot of the other things we're going to see tonight. So I'm just going to put that there. But the idea that when you're getting it from God, you're able to better give your spouse freedom. And one of the freedoms you can give your spouse is this beautiful thing, the ability for them to, the space for them to articulate how they feel and think, and the gift of listening to them. Like, they have the freedom to disagree with me, and I have enough security in myself based on my identity in Christ to be able to hear it without my world collapsing. That's a position of strength instead of one of weakness, and it's an amazing place to be. He goes on, he says, be a separate person with your spouse. There's some counterintuitive truths here. Be a separate person with your spouse. Wait a minute, I thought you said at the beginning of this class, the essence of marriage is the two shall become one, right? Be a separate person. Sometimes one mate will define themselves by their mate and not be their own individual soul. Then, when the spouse disagrees or makes a different decision, she personalizes the difference as an attack against her. For example, a husband will become angry with his wife or something. She will feel that he hates her and will lash back to protect herself. Her inability to be separate from her husband's feelings is the problem. As you become more defined by your own boundaries, you'll experience your mate's feelings and decisions as having more to do with him than with you. This will free you to allow him to be free. I don't know if you caught the significance of that. So a long time ago, not anytime soon. This was me a long time ago. If my wife was upset with me, it would kind of wreck my world. I would kind of collapse. But you get to the point in maturity, you learn that if my spouse is completely upset, I don't have to take that personally. I can be an observer. Thus, I can be a listener because we are two distinct persons. So she's having this thing, so I can talk about how can I meet her needs. Not, hey, Timothy, you're worthless. She's disrespecting you because you have no value. I can actually say, what's going on with her? What does she need? And I can, because she's separate, like her emotional state doesn't have to determine mine. I can choose what mine is. They are separate. So I want to repeat this part again. As you become more defined by your own boundaries, this is me, this is where I am, this is where I end, this is where she is, this is where she ends. And you will experience your mate's feelings and decisions as having more to do with them than with you. This will free you to allow them to be free. So you say, wait a minute, if they're doing all these negative things, that feels like they're controlling me. I'm the victim of all their choices. And what this book is trying to say is like we have to step out of the idea of we're victims of our spouse's choices and say rather, I have the autonomy, the freedom, the authority to choose how I respond to my spouse. And those two things are worlds apart. Value your spouse's freedom as you want your freedom valued. So this is the golden rule. Doing unto others as you would have them do to you, Matthew 7:12, is the basis for how your spouses are to treat each other. Remember how it felt the last time someone attacked you for your freedom to choose, and therefore have compassion on your spouse's choices. So this is not like, I'm going to treat them the way they treat me. This is the idea of, okay, how would I want to be treated in this situation? If I were them, how would I want to be treated? And proactively provide that for them. That is the alternative to punishing your spouse. Like, how would I want to be treated if I was doing X, Y, or Z? And in order to do that, you have to value their freedom. So set boundaries with your spouse instead of controlling them. Often a wife will resort to control strategies because she feels unable to say no or be free with her husband. She may be afraid of her partner's reactions and may feel she can't protect herself. Control becomes a substitute for establishing boundaries of self-control with their spouse. I'm going to say it again. Control becomes a substitute for establishing boundaries of self-control with your spouse. As you set appropriate limits, you can feel safe and give up control in your partner. Both. As you can see, marriage has more to do with bringing yourself under the control of God and His principles than it does with controlling your spouse. However, as you relinquish control of your partner, you are able to better love them, protect your own freedom, and provide a context for both of you to grow. So having said that, we're going to move into this idea of separateness, which is, again, counterintuitive when we're talking about marriage. The idea of it takes two to make one. So that's an unexpected emphasis from the Matthew 19 passage where Jesus says explicitly the two, and He uses actual number. He doesn't say they. He says two will become one. And we often emphasize the oneness, but the authors of this book, they're saying, hey, there actually has to be two in order for it to become one. And we'll see as we go. So two-ness, this idea of two-ness. The requirements for oneness is two complete people. Not a complete person and an incomplete person, or two incomplete persons. The Bible defines a complete person as a mature person. A complete person is able to do all the things that adult life and relationship requires. I'm going to say it again. A complete person is able to do all the things that adult life and relationship requires. Give love, receive love. Be independent and self-sufficient. Live out values honestly. Be responsible. Have self-confidence. Deal with problems and failures. Live out of their talents and have a life. If two people who marry are complete, the oneness they establish will be complete. This is so good, so keep tracking. To the degree that either is less than complete as a person, the oneness will suffer under the strain of that incompleteness. The incomplete partner's longing for completeness will take precedence over what he is able to give to the relationship, and the relationship will suffer. The incomplete partner's longing for completeness will take precedence over what he is able to give to the relationship, and the relationship will suffer. Let me put it in my own words here, in case you didn't get that. I'm looking to my spouse to complete me. I'm using my spouse to meet my needs. That takes priority and precedence over the oneness that we could achieve. And the way we say it often around here, Gospel Life, is I'm looking to my spouse to be God, to meet my needs. My spouse can't meet my needs as if she were God. That's too much strain and pressure. So I can release her from that responsibility. So I'll say it again, having said that, in these words. The incomplete partner's longing for completeness, like I need my wife to treat me in certain kind of ways so that I feel like I'm an actual man. So that I feel like I have some self-worth. Self-worth derived from her affection for me. And if she withholds that from me, I'm going to be desperate to have my soul filled with her love for me. And that's going to take priority and precedence over the we in the relationship. The relationship hence will suffer. Can we see that? So can you see that I'm trying to achieve oneness, but coming from an incompleteness, it actually has the opposite effect. The relationship suffers. So if one or both are coming to marriage asking the marriage to complete them as people, the marriage will break down. Marriage is not meant to be the place where one gets completed as a person. That is very counter to secular wisdom out there in the world today, isn't it? So here we have these two ideas, completing versus complementing. Completing versus complementing. Marriage is not meant to be the place where one gets completed as a person. It is meant for complete persons to come together and build a we that is bigger and better than either one of the I's involved. But marriage is an adult contract. And you should not attempt it without two adults present. For a marriage to work, two separate individuals need to have some elements of adulthood. No one has ever made it to adulthood ready for all that it requires. The good news is that you can grow toward this adulthood or completeness, and as you do, your relationship will attain more and more oneness as well. I'm here to testify that's true. There's time. But it's got to, you got to intentionally give your attention to it. You have to give it the effort. It just will not happen on its own. That's my experience. Completing versus complementing each other. Many people see marriage as a ticket to shortcut completeness or maturity. Therefore, they don't marry out of strength, but out of weakness. They marry someone to make up for that which they do not possess on their own. They marry out of their incompleteness, and doing so erodes the possibility for oneness. Can you see how if we're from this mindset already, if I'm getting married so that that person can fill up that which is lacking in me, that's going to be a long, hard road. You have heard couples say, quote, "We are such a good balance for each other. This can be good if, for example, he's good at business and she's good at building the nest, or vice versa." So he's good at business, she's good at building the nest, or vice versa. But it is not good if it means that she could not survive in the real world of work and commerce on her own without him. If this is true, she has married a meal ticket or someone to take care of her in a childlike dependency. And he has married a mother to take the home, to make the home that he could not build for himself while he goes off and plays during the day. Man, that's a little too real. It's good to have a book written by counselors who have a lot of real-world experience with people, with humans. So you don't want to have do you want to marry someone who sees you as a meal ticket? Do you want to marry someone who sees you as a mother? You want a wife, not a mother. And that wife doesn't want another child. She wants a man, a husband. Is that right? Is that, you feel strongly about this. You've let me know in the past. The crucial element of two becoming one is that the two people must be complete in and of themselves. They must be adults before they marry. This does not mean that the husband and wife possess all. Whoops, something just happened here. Sorry about that. Start again. This does not mean that the husband and wife possess all of the same talents and abilities, or even the same style. It does mean, however, that they possess all of the adult functioning in key areas of personhood. He might not have her business acumen. She might not have his creativity or his ability to be the extroverted life of the party. This is not what we are talking about. These characteristics complement each other, not complete each other. Complementing means bringing different perspectives, talents, abilities, experiences, and other gifts to the relationship and forming a partnership. A couple I know runs a family business. The husband is good at operations while the wife is good at sales. Another couple may complement each other in financial management and the ability to create income. One might be good at seeing the problems in a new opportunity, while the other is good at finding the opportunities. But all of these facets help the couple work together as a team. That's complementing. Completing means making up for one's immaturity as a person. Do you see the difference? Completing means making up for one's immaturity as a person. So it is an attempt to use another person to balance an imbalance in one's character. The way I see it is the realm of character versus the realm of giftedness. Say I'm really good at managing money, you're really good, my wife's really good at finding business opportunities. That's complementing. But the idea, if I have a character deficiency, then we're going to enter into something else altogether, which we're going to explain in a moment. Completing means making up for one's immaturity as a person. It is an attempt to use another person to balance an imbalance in one's character, and it never works. Each person is responsible for developing these character imbalances on one's own and then bringing a whole balanced self into the relationship. So what this is saying, based on what we've already said in the weeks past, is the idea that if we speak the truth in love to our spouse, instead of enabling them, then it actually helps them to grow. The idea of codependency is the idea of I keep my spouse in, I keep them from having all the opportunities to grow. Pain actually leads to gain. It's not an injury. When a spouse is incomplete, they try to solve their incompleteness by a merger with someone who possesses what they do not. And this always backfires. They battle in the other what they could not come to terms with inside themselves. They battle in the other what they could not come to terms with inside themselves. This is one of the reasons the Bible so often talks about completeness as a view of maturity. This is James 1:4 yet again. I'll give you two different versions this time. Let endurance complete its work so that you may be complete and whole, lacking in nothing. So the idea of if a problem comes, instead of letting the person develop some endurance, we just immediately bring the solution and their development stays arrested, let's say. James 1:4, another translation, what's more, you must let patience have its complete effect so that you may be complete and whole, not falling short in anything. So basic human requirements of character are not complements. They are essentials to being a complete person. So below is a partial list of abilities that both partners must possess and that cannot be borrowed from each other. This is a great list, by the way. It's a long list. You guys ready? I feel like we need a drum roll here because this is good stuff. Thank you. So here's a partial list of abilities that both partners must possess that cannot be borrowed from each other. The ability to connect emotionally. So I just want to say this to the men, because I care about you, and I also am a man. If you don't know what that means, you need to find out, okay? I'm here to help. There's other men that can help. I only say that because I realized looking back, there was lots of times where I really didn't know what that meant. I thought I did, but I don't think I really did. The ability to connect emotionally. You're really going to need that if you're going to get married. It's essential. That's only the first one on this list. Secondly, be vulnerable and share feelings. Also a challenge. Thirdly, have an appropriate sense of power and assertiveness. Power and assertiveness. The ability to say no. The ability to have initiative and drive. The ability to have at least a minimal amount of organization. The ability to be real, but not perfect. The ability to accept imperfections and have grace and forgiveness. The ability to grieve. So important. The ability to think for oneself and express one's opinions. The ability to learn and grow. The ability to take risks. The ability to grasp and use one's talents. The ability to be responsible and follow through. The ability to be free and not controlled by external or internal factors. The ability to be sexual. The ability to be spiritual. The ability to have a moral sense. And lastly, have an intellectual life, which I love that one. And my wife and I have, you've done a great job on that one. Rebecca, I really appreciate you. She thinks so differently than me, and but really challenges me. So all those things you need to, if you don't have those, and you're just relying on your spouse to make up that which is lacking in you, then it's going to lead to a lot of stress, a lot of division. Because, yes. Yes, I can. Will I? I would do it right now, but remind me right after, okay? Because I don't want to forget. It is really good. Adults take responsibility for their treasures. And we saw this in chapter 1. Adults take responsibility for their treasures. In chapter 1, we talked about the importance of your taking responsibility for certain aspects of your soul, the treasures that lie within your boundaries. Remember the list. Here it is again. And I kind of tweaked it a little bit. So, feelings. So, I'm going to give you an idea of these treasures that you have when you don't take responsibility and you actually look to your spouse to complete you. Feelings. I have hurt feelings. Fix it. I have a bad attitudes. I have a bad attitude. Deal with it. Behaviors. I have bad behaviors. Ignore it. Choices. I made bad choices. Suffer with it. Limits. I go past my limits. Deal with it. Desires. I have destructive desires. Allow it. Thoughts. I have negative thoughts. Submit to it. Values. Couldn't think of one there. Talents. Nope. Love. I need love. Fill me up. Give it. Okay, so we're responsible for all those things, and that's where I'm saying you have a spiritual life between you and God, looking to God ultimately as the one that you can express your hurt feelings to recalibrate your bad attitude with, your behaviors, your choices, your limits, your desires, your thought, all that spiritual life. So when ownership and responsibility are lacking, blame is shifted, and problem solving breaks down. When ownership and responsibility are lacking, blame is shifted, and problem-solving breaks down. So we saw at the very beginning of the book, the whole back-and-forth ping-pong tennis match, the bandying about of, it's your fault, no, it's your fault, I did this because you did that, but I did that because you did this, and you did, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And to get out of that whole cycle, that destructive cycle, we have to say, okay, what am I responsible for? If a wife does not take responsibility for how she feels, she blames her partner when she feels unhappy. Her kind of irresponsibility translates like this: if I feel bad, you are doing something wrong. You should be doing something different. How many divorces and how much unhappiness occur because one partner depends on the other for happiness and completeness? How can this be avoided? First, by each person taking ownership of their own treasures, which we talked about in chapter 1 again. Second, by each person requiring their spouse to take ownership as well, which we're going to get into tonight. So this idea of requiring ownership. Requiring ownership. So I feel like in this part of the book, we're beginning to transition to empowering someone. So like you feel like, okay, I'm taking responsibility. I want to exercise self-control, but yet my spouse is doing these things that are very troubling. What do I do about it? I think we're getting to transition to that part of the journey. Requiring ownership. And again, you can't require ownership of your spouse if you're not taking ownership of your own stuff. It just doesn't work. And I want to say to the men especially, again, like the idea of when we take responsibility, it's good leadership. Coming out of denial and confessing our own insecurity or fears or sense of inadequacy, whatever it is, that's good leadership in the sense that we're modeling for our family security in our weakness because our identity is found in something more transcendent. Codependency is taking responsibility for another person's problems and not requiring that person to take responsibility for their own. Isn't that a good definition? I think that was really nailed it. I'll say it again. Codependency is taking responsibility for another person's problems and not requiring that person to take responsibility for their own. What happens when we throw a bunch of resources at something without requiring the person to take responsibility or there's no accountability? Like I tell to people sometimes, like, I can't care more about your situation than you do. The idea that, hey, they come to me and say, hey, handle all my problems. Meanwhile, they can sit back and relax. It just doesn't, yeah. Yeah, exactly right. So good, John. So good. So we want to, like, sometimes we have to get out of the way because we realize, wow, there's a codependency thing happening here. And I'm going to keep getting these bad results if I don't do something different. So why do we mention it here in a section on becoming a complete person? Because a mature, complete adult not only takes responsibility for themselves, but also requires the same from the people they love. So there's two things happening. I'm going to take responsibility for myself, but I'm also going to help you take responsibility for yourself. I'm going to try to step out of a codependency thing. To be codependent and not require responsibility from others is to not be responsible for oneself. Do you see how that goes together? Let's look at an example of codependency. Scooter had hit a wall in his relationship with Maggie. He came to see me, Dr. Cloud, and his first complaint was about himself. I just can't seem to be the right kind of husband. I keep letting Maggie down, and I don't know how to do better. He talked for quite a while about how guilty he felt because he was such a failure as a husband. I empathized with him for what it must feel like to have performed so poorly, and then I asked him to tell me some of the problem areas where he was failing so badly. He gave me such a long list that I could not have kept up if I had been taking notes. Here are just a few examples. 1, letting her down by not making enough money to provide for all her needs. 2, working too much and making her unhappy because he was gone so much. Thirdly, forgetting to do things that were important to her. And then fourthly, continuing to work with a woman who was a problem. What's so funny? I could see that this was going to take a lot of work if he was so oblivious that he continued to do long-standing, hurtful things. Think of it. Financial irresponsibility and non-performance. Abandonment, treating her as unimportant. Misplaced loyalty. What an insensitive person, I thought. So we went to work, and I asked him about each of these situations. I was amazed at what I found out. Here was reality. 1, Scooter was not making enough money to buy Maggie a new car every 2 years. 2, even though he worked at home, Scooter had a handful of meetings during the week for which he had to leave home. He might have to go downtown for 3 or 4 hours. Maggie would feel abandoned. 3, Maggie would give Scooter a long list of things to do, and he might not get all of them done in the time period she specified. 4, Maggie did not like a woman with which Scooter had a business deal. The woman was doing a good job on the as yet unfinished project, but Maggie did not like her and felt that this was reason enough for him to default on his agreements. So Scooter did have some problems, but the problem he had was not that he was such a bad husband, but that he was so codependent that he did not require Maggie to take responsibility for her own feelings and attitudes. He had to learn that he was not responsible for meeting all her demands and that it was okay for him to say no to some and not internalize her blame. And I think with reference to me, like I used to do that a lot early on, internalize the blame, and it was send me on an emotional roller coaster. And then once I got on that roller coaster, it was very challenging for me to provide security and stability for my family. Her unrealistic financial wishes were standing in the way of her taking responsibility for her envy and lack of contentment. When he gave in to her, he did not require her to deal with herself and her problems. Okay, that would have been pain, not injury, right? One of the greatest gifts we can give each other is the gift of honesty and confrontation. Ooh, yes, confrontation is it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Now, when I say confrontation, I don't mean, I hate you. You're such a bad person. That's not what we're talking about. Speaking the truth in love, that includes self-control, gentleness, patience, kindness, all those things. One of the greatest gifts, okay, we got that. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. We grow when someone who loves us wounds us by telling us painful truths we need to hear. Requiring responsibility from each other by telling each other the truth and not giving in to each other's immaturity is indeed a gift. I'll say it again. We grow when someone who loves us wounds us by telling us painful truths we need to hear. Requiring responsibility from each other by telling each other the truth and not giving in to each other's immaturity is indeed a gift. Now again, this dynamic is not ever going to happen or function if you're doing something that is close but it's not the same thing at all, which is you're saying things that are maybe even true, but you're using them as a weapon. You're saying that out of anger or control. Because what we saw last week is when we do that, we might say something that's it's a hard truth, but it is a truth, but we're weaponizing it, then it's no longer about the issue at hand, it becomes about how it's being presented. And then the person responds like, you're punishing me, I'm going to punish you. And so the whole thing we're supposed to be talking about is kind of set aside, and now we're just talking about this other stuff. Reactions instead of responses. So adults value their treasures and those of their spouse. This is really good. A couple of men were talking about making some plans for the near future. One man asked the other to meet him over breakfast to discuss a potential investment. The other said, "Let me see how my wife feels about it, and I will get back to you." It's going to pause right there. How's the story going to end? Is this going to be a positive thing or a negative thing? Is this a man who's just so weak that he doesn't know how to make a decision on his own without consulting his boss, a.k.a. his wife, the CEO or CFO? Is that what's going down here? Let me check with my wife and get back to you. The first man, clearly annoyed, asked, "Why do you have to check with her? Can't you make your own decisions?" The first man did not realize that it was not a matter it was not a matter of his friend being unable to make his own decisions. It was a matter of seeing how his wife would be affected by his plans. But more than that, he really wanted to know what she thought. He really wanted to know what she thought. He wanted her wisdom and her opinion on his plans. In short, he valued her treasures. They were important to him. This didn't mean that he was dependent on his wife and couldn't think for himself. He knew what he thought, but he placed such a high value on what his wife thought that he did not want to miss out on her perspective. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you want? Like, this idea that we complement each other, like my wife thinks so differently than me, but I'm always the better for getting her wisdom, her input, her perspective on a point. That does not mean I will take her point of view every single time either. But I don't know when I haven't modified something, and made a better, more holistic decision with her input. So, not wanting to miss out is a good way to think of valuing the treasures of your spouse's soul. Now, a husband like that, do you think his wife is going to feel treasured? Is that going to lead to some good intimacy? So seeing the other as a person, not my object. So I've had a friend challenge me when I say my wife. He challenges me like, is she your possession? Is she your object that you possess? And it's like, no, it's a term of endearment. But I see his point. We got to be careful on this. My wife is not just an object for me to possess and use to, for my own, at whim. The first component is the ability to see your spouse as a separate person, distinct from you, with her own needs and feelings. In other words, she doesn't exist just to meet your needs. Whenever we view others only in terms of how they affect us, we are in big trouble. This is self-centeredness. Is that what that is? What? Whenever we view others only in terms of how they affect us, we are in big trouble. This is self-centeredness. Like, I just think of you as you're the person that meets my needs in these areas. All right, you haven't met the need yet. Like, aren't you going to do your thing? You're supposed to do that thing. So, this is self-centeredness. We reduce others to objects of our own needs, and we don't see them as real people. And whenever we don't see people for who they really are, love breaks down, allowing the other's experience. This is good. Another way in which we allow others to exist in their own right is to allow their experience. We need to put our own experience aside and join in the other's experience. We need to understand the other's experience, identify with it, and have compassion for the other in it. The ability to do this is called, can you guess? Empathy. Right. For 5,000. Yes, you nailed it immediately. So I'm going to say that again, because this is like, we cannot not have this. We have to have this, okay? Another way in which we allow others to exist in their own right is to allow their experience. We need to put our own experience aside. Okay, do you have this ability? I genuinely want to know, do you have this ability? This is my experience. I have this ability where I can take my experience and I can literally set it aside. I can put it down. And then I can jump into my wife's experience and see it in her shoes through her eyes. And I'm walking through that. And I'm letting all of that affect me and hit me. I'm going through that experience with her. That doesn't mean that I'm not able to pick up my experience again and to walk her through that. But while it's her turn for me to empathize with her, I have to have the ability to set my stuff aside and walk through her with her. And if I can do that, she will feel seen, known, understood. So like my whole thing, like, Rebecca, I really don't care how you feel or what your experience was. I just need you to understand mine. It just doesn't go well. And it's almost like there's, in my past, there was a desperation where if I don't share this right now with her, I won't be able to. And so just like a bull in a china shop, just taking, it's like beating her down, like you have to, no, like my experience, my perspective is the one that matters. How close is my wife going to feel? Like how much intimacy is there going to be in my house if I do that? So here's the thing. I can definitely take it aside I'm calm, I'm stable, I'm secure, I can put it aside. I can completely immerse myself in her experience because I want to understand her. And then when I pick my experience back up to share it with her, I actually can communicate it in a way that just to make sure that I affirm her, say, hey, I'm not taking away from your experience, I'm just telling you how I took it at the moment. So I want to communicate sensitivity to her as I'm taking this. I want to say that all over again. We need to put our own experience aside and join in the other's experience. We need to understand the other's experience, identify with it, and have compassion for the other in it. The ability to do this is called empathy. Empathy is a bedrock of intimacy. I want to say this, I hope this is not too far afield. In the dating process, people who can do this, like especially young men who can do this, this is where bonds are formed. It's actually very powerful. If you don't understand what I'm saying, ask me later. So if I can't allow you to be a person in your own right, then I can't empathize with you. I'll always take your experience as meaning something about me. Or I'll react to your feelings by thinking of myself, not you. Isn't that terrible? I'll always take your experience as meaning something about me. Or I'll react to your feelings by thinking of myself, not you. So Karen and Will had this problem. In one of their sessions, they reported an incident the night before in which Karen had tried to share her feelings on what was going on in their relationship. I don't feel close to you lately, Karen said. What do you mean, asked Will. I just feel disconnected. Great, just great, Will said. All I do is bust my butt for you and try to give you all my time and energy apart from work, and you don't even appreciate it. I don't even know why I try. At this point, Karen started to sob. She felt alone and not listened to. It's very lonely, isn't it? This had been a pattern in their relationship. Whenever Karen would try to tell Will how she felt about something, he would take it as an accusation of him. He couldn't listen to her and be with her in the experience. He didn't have the ability to empathize with her because he could not get past himself. Karen felt stuck in her attempts to get him to connect with her at a deep level. I'll say it again. He didn't have the ability to empathize with her because he could not get past himself. Karen felt stuck in her attempts to get him to connect with her at a deep level. So it's like the self-centeredness is taken over. And I want to say, one of the things I think about when I read this is children, in large part, their empathy is developed in their childhood when their caretaker is empathizing for them. Especially when mom is nurturing to the kid, okay, mom is empathizing with my experience, and through that, that becomes imprinted, and I learn to empathize for others. The other thing that happens in childhood with reference to empathy is when a dad holds their child accountable, it's like, hey, you hit your brother, you need to get that right. It actually leads to empathy because they have to think through how they hurt their brother, their sibling. So those two ways. So the idea is, say you didn't get a lot of that in childhood, you can make up that which is lacking in some sense by taking responsibility. Not because you're forcing your spouse to, you need to make up that which is lacking in yourself, but I'm going to use this experience to say, hey, I need to grow in this area. I need to grow in this area. A lot of times I tell the men around here, you need to shut up and listen and only take notes for the next year. And good things can happen as a result. So you just think about it, you just silently in your head right now, and maybe communicate this with your spouse later, and then check to see if your grade that you gave yourself corresponds with the grade your spouse would give you. Rate yourself on your ability to empathize. When you're empathizing for your spouse, are you empathizing, or are you kind of circling back secretly to make it all about you? Do you have the ability to set your experience on hold and fully walk through their experience? Rate yourself, your ability to empathize. If you don't have that, like if you need to do some work, I would challenge you, it's worth the investment. It will lead to deeper intimacy. There's times where, like, okay, I've said, and I'm not trying to say I'm the best husband in the world, but like the idea of, hey, Rebecca, how did you experience that? Because like you get to the point where like I really care much more about your experience than mine. Like, I already know what my experience is. I want to know your experience. We can talk about mine if you really insist, but, like, I want to know, how did you take that? Because, like, we'll see more about that in a moment, because we're almost done. Excuse me. So to have good boundaries is to be separate enough from the other person that you can allow them to have their own experience without reacting with your own. You can allow them, this is so good, this is part of the empathy segment, you can allow them to have their own experience without reacting with your own. Such a clear stance of separateness allows you not to react. You ever been at a party and there was a person there that always felt like it seemed like they always had to one-up you? Like you talked about this vacation you went on, you're like, I went on this better vacation. How did that make you feel? Like just so close to them, like you wanted them to be your new best friend? Or did you try to secretly dismiss yourself and get to the other side of the room and talk to somebody else? And then when you got to the other side of the room and you talked to somebody else, you found there's a whole crowd of people who had already talked to that person. They're all talking about how that person is, like, okay, I don't want to be that person in my, imagine if that's me, like I'm that person at the party. Timothy, it's you. You're that person. And like, imagine how my wife is suffering under my inability to empathize with her. It's all about my day and your day. You probably had a boring day. Let's talk about mine. Okay. So in a good marriage, spouses value each other's differences and treat them with respect. They understand each other, listen, reason, compromise, and give up their own wishes sometimes. Because two-ness exists, oneness can develop. That's so good. I want to say it again. In a good marriage, spouses value each other's differences and treat them with respect. Like, Rebecca, why do you think that? Why do you see it that way? Why are you on your phone right now? I want to understand what's going on with you. So they understand each other, they listen, they reason, they compromise, and they give up their own wishes sometimes. Because two-ness exists, oneness can develop. In a marriage in which the individuals aren't allowed to be different, things don't go as well. Husbands and wives judge each other as bad for the preferences each one has, or they take the difference as a personal affront or a lack of love. To immature people, differences imply distance, lack of love, abandonment, rejection, or in some cases, a challenge for us to grow. And under this threat, love gets put to the back burner for self-protection. In other words, in order for me to feel close to you, you have to agree with me. Otherwise, I feel rejected by you. I feel abandoned by you. You have to think the same way and have the same opinion, same perspective, and agree with everything I'm saying. Otherwise, I erupt or I withhold affection. So the idea of cherishing each other's existence, I just don't want to I just want to hear her describe it, Robert said about Susan's dance class. I love this. Check us out. Quote, I just want to hear her describe it, Robert said about Susan's dance class. Quote, but you hate dancing, I said to him, wondering why he wanted to hear a play-by-play recap. I just want to hear it and see it through her eyes and ears. She gets things out of it that I just can't. Robert loved Susan. And one of the things he loved about her was her ability to experience things like dancing at a very deep, sensual level. He loved the way she processed life. In other words, he cherished her experience of life. He loved her essence, who she was apart from him. This is gold. This is solid gold. The idea of I just love you for who you are. Now, I think in our dating experience, it was way easier for us to see this. But a lot of times, the things that we cherished and valued about the person, they were unique during the dating relationship, they become what irritates us the most in marriage. But not so here. What was so interesting about what Robert did was that he loved something about Susan that had nothing to do with him. She was in no way meeting some need or interest of his. She was just being herself, and he was gaining pleasure from knowing her and experiencing her. He cherished her just as she was, for just who she was. Even when she was not giving to him, she was important to him and loved by him. So even when she was not giving to him, she was important to him and loved by him. Another part of the you are not me concept is the ability to see another person for who she is apart from what we want or need from her, to love and appreciate that person for who she is. To cherish someone's existence apart from you and apart from what you get from that person is an important aspect of love. It requires very good boundaries, the ability to see the other person as distinct and separate from you, a person in their own right with value and wonderful things about themselves, and have nothing to do with gratifying you in any way other than pure appreciation. This is the joy of just knowing a person. This aspect of love is one of the ones that gives the most pleasure as couples grow together. All right, we have one more and we're going to be finished for tonight, okay? So stay tuned. Adults, as opposed to children, respect each other's freedom. Freedom is a prerequisite of love. If someone controls us, love is not possible. Can I say that again? We talked about the idea early on in the lecture, the idea of giving up on these control mechanisms like guilt and shame, like anger. If someone controls us, love is not possible. Control results in slavery, not love. The ability for each partner to allow the other to be free, a free, separate person, is one of the hallmarks of a solid relationship. The balance of being deeply connected, as well as free to be individuals, is one of the most important aspects of completeness. It allows the development and growth of the individual partners as well as the marriage. But many people struggle with allowing each other to be free. They operate on the philosophy of the old bumper sticker: if you love someone, set them free. If they love you, they will return. And if they don't, hunt them down and kill them. Freedom is okay until it displeases us in some way. Some spouses use their freedom to indulge their own desires at the expense of the marriage. But remember, it goes both ways. You are free to be separate, but you're also free to be controlling. No one can stop you except yourself. So if you are trying to control your spouse's separateness and freedom with guilt and prohibition, then ask yourself the same question: would you like to be imprisoned? Again, the answer is certainly not. The golden rule is the best defense against freedom becoming a license to be self-centered. That golden rule. If you're not controlling your spouse's freedom and separateness, if you are controlling your spouse's freedom and separateness, you are no longer an object of love. Did you guys catch that? If you're controlling your spouse's freedom and separateness, you're no longer an object of love. You have become two things that your spouse will rebel against because it is part of God's plan. You have become the master of a slave, and you have become a parent. A spouse was never intended to be either. If you're a controller, remember the price you will pay in the end. Your spouse will fight your control to be a free person and an adult. Hopefully. She was made to be an individual, free from control, so that she could be freely choose to bring the individuality to you to form a we. Rebelling against control is the motivation behind many affairs and other problems. The spouse who feels controlled is not mature enough to stand up to control with responsible boundaries, and he acts out in an affair to gain a sense of freedom. He finds someone who accepts him. Or so it feels like in the lie of an affair, adultery. The freedom becomes intoxicating, and he falls like a sheep to the slaughter. This drive for companionship must be kept at the forefront of our discussion of freedom. If one of you is controlling, if you restrict your partner's freedom, companionship is destroyed. But beyond that, freedom nourishes separateness, which is, in and of itself, an undesirable state. This is such a critical point. I want to say it again. Freedom nourishes separateness, which is in and of itself an undesirable state. So freedom leads to separateness, not something you actually want. Therefore, freedom from each other, ironically, creates the very longing that will bring you together over and over again. You must build freedom into your marriage so that you have enough separateness to desire to come together to solve the problem that separateness created. So that's wild. Loneliness. So allow the person to be separate so they can choose to come back to you, because separateness leads to a sense of loneliness, leads to a desire to be together with someone. Versus someone who's always seeking to control you, you're always seeking to rebel and run. And you're going to run to where you find freedom. And that freedom can be a deception that leads to a lot of destruction. So this paradox is one of the balancing truths in God's universe. Separateness and togetherness go hand in hand. If you have too much separateness, you have no relationship because you become too disconnected. But if you have no separateness, you also have no relationship because there are no longer two people involved. So good. That's it. Any questions? Discussion? A lot to take in. I know it's kind of a fire hydrant night. Okay. What stood out from this week to you guys? Anything? Still processing? Rebecca?
A lot of times you marry before you're a full adult. So what do you do then? How do you help each other become adults?
I think that's all we've been talking about. We'll just go through this process. So I think that, what we've seen thus far is, you have to take into account yourself, and you have the enough self-awareness to admit where your struggles are and allow someone to speak into your life. I think one of the ways you get there is by going through courses like this. Katie? Did you have something? It is a lot to process. This is a whole different way of looking at life. So I would encourage you, if that was a lot to process and you try to get your head wrapped around it, get the audiobook, go back through chapter 4, buy the book, read through it, the chapters. Anybody else? Angela. Yeah, right. It's not just your problem and I'm out of here. But it allows them to choose. So you're actually respecting their freedom. Like option A leads to this, option B leads to this. What do you want to do? Because it's your decision. Rebecca.
So would you say our homework is to take the responsibility for that list? And could you read that list again?
I would like to send it to everybody. So, see that piece of paper right there? Will you take it to that back table with the pen? And if you would like me to put you on the list, I would like to send that not just to Katie, but to everybody, because it's such a good list. And then you can use that this week to have conversations. And you can grade each other on, how do you think I'm doing on this? Especially, I think the big idea from tonight is let your spouse grade you on your ability to empathize. And I want to say this, don't resist. Do not resist. They get to be the teacher and put the grade on your paper, okay? Let them grade you, hear it, just speed up the process. And just say, hey, you know what? If I got a bad grade, I'm going to get an A. My goal is to get an A+ by the end of the year. And if you're going to get an A+ by the end of the year, you're going to have some date nights. You're going to have to intentionally look for opportunities to listen. And men, I want to say this. Our tendency is to fix. Fixing is listening. Our wife is so smart, they already know the solution. Women are intelligent. Do you know this? You guys discovered this yet? They're smart. Josh. Yeah. Okay, Josh, I think you're setting the bar a little high. Let's just kind of bring it down a little bit. 15 years. So I would imagine, if that's the way you're interacting with your wife, I would imagine it brings a lot of security and stability to your household, to your relationship. Now, do you find it ends up being reciprocal at all? Or do you have so many issues that takes up all the time? We don't even get to her. So where do you get enough security within yourself to be able to listen to critique? I know she's not here, but I think I'm safe to ask this question. What? Okay. How I would imagine she's pretty good at being gentle, kind, compassionate in the way she engages. Cool. Very cool. So I will send these bullet points and let your spouse, your significant other, grade you. All right? You could go down the line, A, B, C, D, or F. There's no E's, right? When I was a kid. So let them grade you and see how you do. And if you got a bad grade in one of them, then let them communicate to you and just say, hey, I'm just going to receive that, I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to get a different result. It could be the worth this whole course just for that. Okay. So you got the paper back there already? Thank you. Anybody else? Jeff. Yeah. I love you for who you are. Cherish each other's existence. Yep. Exactly. Yes. It goes back to something you cherish. So, and the way to get there is to listen. Like, why do you do that thing you do? Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. Why do you ask? Well, it affects me in this way. Or you say, oh, I see now, I understand why you're doing what you're doing. That makes a lot of sense. Don't change a thing. I appreciate now that I understand. Yeah. I don't even want to think about the future with that. It's going to be some tears. Katie?
Okay. I wrote down when you give your spouse space to be able to disagree, talk, feel heard, in empathy, that equals freedom.
Yes. And I want to say, just to emphasize it again, so we could take our experience and we can set it aside, fully engage and walk through their experience with them. It doesn't mean that you can't take your experience back and still communicate it. It doesn't mean you're a doormat, okay? Or that your experience doesn't matter. All right, appreciate your time. I appreciate your dedication. 5 weeks in, 3 more to go. We do have some important content coming up, so I'm tempted to skip to the end, so please be here next week. Time is flying. Also, at the end of this, I think it's November 13th, we're going to take a week to talk about family worship, and then we're going to launch into our 8-week parenting course, and we might take a break with reference to Christmas, because Christmas might be on a Wednesday this year. I can't remember. Anybody know? Because it is? Oh, it is on Wednesday. Okay. We're at 2024, in case... I don't know what you... All right, you guys are dismissed. Appreciate your commitment. Go love each other.